of mental illness, and the host has enabled recording to be okay. Good, and then we could go from there. And if people have questions, if the two of you have questions or somebody else joins on, we can have a discussion rather than a presentation. Because so what do you think of when you think of mental illness from a biblical perspective? What do you think of? Do you have any examples of somebody in the Bible that you might have considered mentally ill?
King David.
Very good. Or actually Saul.
Oh yeah, he probably had bipolar.
No, well, actually, Saul had a diagnosable, because he was, for a while he thought he was an animal, and I forget the name of that diagnosis, but and there may have been some bipolar there, some depression. Okay. How about the Gadarene, the demoniac in the cemetery in Mark 5? Do you remember that story?
Off the top of my head.
So there's this guy that they couldn't I would read it, but my Bible is also my phone, and right now. So the story is in Mark 5, and you can go look it up. And basically Jesus is presented with this fellow that is so out of his mind that he lives in the cemetery. He hurts himself. The chains can't bind him. He's out of control. And then Jesus casts a demon out of them, and he's tranquil at that point, and so scary that the town asks him to leave, because I'm guessing that maybe the Gadarene was at least part of the culture, if not a tourist attraction. I don't know. So what do you suppose was the cause of that demoniac, or well, that gives the name of it, but that fella in the cemetery? What was the cause of his mental illness? What do you think? Simple answer.
Satan. I thought that's
right.
The whole point of it. That was Satan.
Right, and that was clearly a symbol, or clearly evidence of somebody. When Jesus was able to cast the demon out, that was clearly an evidence that the guy had demonic oppression. So that is a source of mental illness that most manuals won't acknowledge. Unfortunately, a lot of times the church wants to equate all mental illness with simply being a spiritual issue. And there's actually a couple other sources of mental illness. People get a genetic predisposition towards mental illness. And there's a manual. It's called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So I can't look at Trenton. I can't look at you and say, well, it looks to me like you're an alcoholic. I don't have that luxury. I have to go to the DSM, and I have to go to the page on alcoholism, I forget the number, and I have to go to 9 criteria, and I have to identify 3 criteria to be able to diagnose alcoholism. And so alcoholism, one of the evidences of alcoholism, or one of the indicators when you're doing an evaluation, is there a familial history? We know that there's other diseases that have genetic predisposition, diabetes, high blood pressure, but some of the mental disorders like schizophrenia and some of those. And so those are what they call organic sources of mental illness. You mentioned bipolar disorder, Josiah. Bipolar disorder, do you know what causes bipolar disorder?
No, I don't.
Okay, bipolar disorder is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. It's an organic disorder. And because of that, that's why they treat it with medicine, because they kind of balance the chemicals in the brain. They give you an antidepressant when you have bipolar disorder, But because the antidepressant, does everybody know what bipolar disorder is?
Yeah, I think so.
They used to call it manic depressive, and they still refer to the two poles as mania and depression. Well, most individuals have a governor that you can get so depressed or so happy, and there's kind of a spectrum that we pendulate within. But people with bipolar disorder don't have that limitation on either end, so they can get extra intense in their emotion. It's not just happy. It could be extra angry. It could be and they can become extra depressed, and that's because of the ebbs and flows of chemistry in the brain. Now, if they give them an antidepressant to keep them out of the depressive, if they're not careful, that will kick it off to make it more, send them off into a manic episode. So they give them two chemicals, and their life becomes more normal. They get antidepressant, and they get a mood stabilizer, and then they manage that the rest of their life. And they tend to inherit that from one or both sides of their family. That's an organic source of mental health issues. Then there's another one is situational. The question is nature or nurture in the mental health world. Maybe you've heard that, maybe you haven't. What causes mental health issues, nature or nurture? Is it my biology or is it my environment? And the simple answer is yes. A lot of the more common personality disorders, or a lot of the more common mental health disorders, are what they call personality disorders. And those are more of a logic issue. And so they're not necessarily treated with chemistry. They're treated with reframing. As an Adlerian, I listen to a person's story, and I listen to what Adler would call guiding fictions, some positions that the client has in their mind that are not true, and then I challenge those. So some ideas of these are personality disorders. These are the ones that are non-organic. Would be things like borderline personality disorder, or antisocial personality disorder, or histrionic personality disorder. And these are all logics that they were probably taught growing up in some fashion or another that really don't function, and they get in the way of interpersonal relationships. And those are more dealt with by education. So a lot of times when they're doing mental health, they do psychoeducation. When I first came to the track in Seattle, or here in San Antonio, and I was working by the chaplaincy, and my boss wanted to make everything a spiritual issue. And he said, you need to be praying for these people. I do. And there's times when I pray for them all the way down to San Antonio Mental Health as I'm driving them there, because they need that care. Today we don't think when somebody has diabetes, we don't think of it as a spiritual issue, do we? No, it's a medical issue that he needs to have treated with medicine. And without the medicine, their quality of life becomes diminished, and they might die earlier. Well, the same is true with some mental health. So it's never a simple answer. It's always spiritual, or it's never spiritual. It's always biological, or it's never. So when you're doing an assessment and looking at the situation, it's important to kind of go, what are all the factors in it? Is there an environmental issue? Is there a logic issue? Is there a family history of depression? That's one that's very commonly has a very common familial link. And sometimes people just have bad personalities, and so have you ever had experiences or had thoughts of observations about people, and you kind of go, I wonder what's going on, and we can get real. There was a church in Seattle, actually my hometown in Renton, which is a suburb of Seattle, and I'm a Pentecostal. They were Pentecostal, kind of like me, but not with the same denomination. And they got a lot of notoriety because they were so convinced that demons were everywhere that they would have demon casting out services in the church. It was up in the Highlands in Renton. I forget the name of the church, but they had, you know how at the altar most churches have little boxes of Kleenex. Is that pretty familiar with most of you guys? This church also had little Dixie cups, and they would encourage you to cough up some spittle, and the darker the color of the spittle in the Dixie cup, the more powerful the demon it was that you're expelling out of your body. And the sad thing is that got a lot of notoriety in the front page of the main paper in the city of Seattle, front page of the religion section. And so a lot of times people think they're going through spiritual warfare or they're being oppressed by the devil. And really, they're just paying the price for bad decisions. They make bad decisions and they pay the price, and so they get depressed, and so it creates a cycle. So Josiah, what kind of questions might you have about mental illness within the church?
I would definitely say, like, how would you help someone who is severely depressed, who does have, like, I guess, like, suicidal thoughts, I guess, since we are going remote and we are more isolated than we are ever before. And I guess we are a lot more alone with our thoughts than we have been before.
That's a great question, Josiah. And so how do you get involved with somebody that you suspect is suicidal? And there's primarily two mental health disorders that tend to find suicidal ideation is more common: borderline personality disorder, and then the bipolar that you talked about. But anybody who's depressed enough might consider wanting to end the pain. So there's two diagnostic questions that that help you determine how significant is the issue. And do you happen to know what those questions might be, Josiah? Or anyone? So the first question is, and you need to ask it, fairly gently, but you ask them if they have a plan. So what is your plan? And then you need to find out how readily accessible the plan is. So if I told you, and I have at a time in my life, I considered suicide, and the person that I confided with asked me these two questions. Didn't ask them in a very good way, but they did have an impact on me, and it kind of brought me out of, this was 150 years ago. So if I call you up, Josiah, and I say, I think I'm thinking about killing myself, and you say, well, how do you think you might do it? And I go, I'm going to jump out of an airplane. And so then you ask me, well, are you at an airport? No. Do you have any access to an airplane right now? No. Then what might that suggest? I'm thinking about it, but it's not imminent. If I call you up and I say I'm thinking about killing myself and I'm going to take pills, and you say, do you have the pills with you? They're right here by my bedside. Then you would argue that that is a more immediate risk for suicide. So the more immediate risk you have, the most appropriate thing to do is you call the police. Not to incarcerate somebody, but here in Texas and anywhere in the United States that I know of, they have the ability to put people under supervised observation for 72 hours for the professionals to do a deeper assessment of their mental health condition. So it's not your job or your job or your job to diagnose. And in fact, you do everyone a disservice if you minimize something. It's like, if there's a question, it's better to call and have the police come, because they have training on intervention, and they can take the person into custody if they so deem it, and then take them to, a lot of times it's here at Laurel Ridge here in San Antonio, but there's other hospitals, and give the because that's, boys and girls, this stuff's done by professionals. Don't try this at home. And then you're not held liable either, or guilt. If you ignore somebody's cries for help and they end up dispatching themselves, nobody wants to live with that responsibility, having said, if only I could have. So it's better to err on the side of caution. If you think the person's talking about it, if you think they're giving, so what might be some signs that somebody's thinking about suicide that maybe they're not saying it? In fact, a lot of people who really consider suicide don't talk about it. So what might be some signs that you can think of, anyone that you can think of, that somebody might be considering suicide?
I've always heard that if someone's extremely depressed for a long period of time, and you can see it, and then usually right at the point that they decide they are going to do it, they usually become very happy all of a sudden. And
There is that.
That's what I've always heard.
How about their property? What do people with true suicidal ideation, what might they do with their property?
Start giving it away.
They start giving it away. Here, I want you to have my favorite guitar. Well, it's your favorite guitar. I know, but you play the guitar so well. And Josiah, I want you to have my car. Oh, but it's your car. Well, I don't drive very much. So they'll have a reason, but if you start seeing them disseminating their property, especially their valuable stuff that's important to them, stuff that is important to them, it's grounds to maybe, if you feel like you have enough of a relationship where you can say, how are you doing? One of the things that helps me is having been suicidal when I was 24. I was in a situation where I felt the pain was such that I didn't feel like I could remedy the pain. And I just wanted the pain to stop. And so one of the things that I use when I'm having conversations with people that either have admitted considering suicide, or I suspect or strongly suspect are considering suicide, is I tell them, I understand what it's like when you hurt so bad you just want the pain to stop. That's all. It's not that most people who commit suicide really want to kill themselves. They just want the pain to stop. And they can't think of another way, because they get tunnel vision, they get focused, they generally in depression, they get fatigued because they're not sleeping well. And we all know that when we're not sleeping well, we don't tend to make great decisions. And so a lot of times when people actually successfully commit suicide by somebody who takes pills doesn't necessarily plan to kill themselves. They're hoping to be rescued. Unfortunately, nobody comes in and catches them with the pills in time and they succumb to their suicide. Or when we were in school, they talked about the fella who wanted attention, and he scheduled it so that he would hang himself in the garage about the same time that his wife would be pulling in from work. So he put the stool up and he tied the noose, and just a minute or so before she consistently comes home, he kicks the stool away. Well, she stops off at the HEB to buy some flowers, and so she comes home 15 minutes later and he is no longer breathing. So those are styles of suicidal attempt that aren't necessarily intentional. Now, gunshot wound, that's intentional. They just want to end it. And so once again, also the kind of style of suicide the person is considering might have an impact as far as how serious this is and how serious it's not. Does that answer your question, Josiah?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
Sure. Is there any other thoughts? And that was a great question, because you're right, Josiah. Isolation is having a big, we do know that drug use, alcoholism is on a rise. We know that depression is on a rise. The school, the school of counseling, or the school of psychology that I try to follow, is taught by a guy named Alf Adler. It's called Individual Psychology. And his basic foundation is that mankind needs social connection. And so what have we been doing for a year? Social distancing. And it's causing people to get afraid. And it's causing people to have more anxiety. And there's a good thing to talk about. What is anxiety? Have you ever known anybody to suffer from anxiety, or have you ever experienced anxious moments in your life? What is anxiety? You have any ideas?
I mean, I've definitely had anxious moments before. Definitely like when I was in middle school and early high school, pretty much before I got into theater, I was very anxious, but I'm trying to think how to explain that feeling. You know what I mean? It was just like every time you try something new, even when you just try something you tried before, it was just kind of like terrifying, because you're like, oh, what if I mess up today? What if I'm not the best? You know, like there's always like it's a bunch of what ifs. Like instead of you just focusing on doing something or meeting someone or just walking into a room, you sort of, what if when I walk into the room, it's this, or what if so-and-so is, you know what I mean? So it was a lot of what ifs for me.
So what anxiety is, it's fear of loss, and failure is a form of loss, fear of loss in the future. And so one of the things to ask yourself if you're experiencing anxiety, or if you're with somebody that's talking about how anxious they feel, is to kind of examine how realistic is that? What will happen? Now, when I was in school, sometimes I would feel anxiety for tests. In fact, I have a phrase, test anxiety. And one of the things that I had to do self-talk with myself is to remind myself that, you know, when this test is over, when noon comes, I'll still be alive. The birds will still be singing. Life will go on. It's because what happens is sometimes when we get in the spiral of anxiety, we create the catastrophe by spiraling down and continuing to ruminate and think about it. And the more we ruminate, the more afraid we get, because anxiety is a fear of loss in the future. So if that's the case, how do we combat that? How do we combat anxiety? Well, we look at how realistic the anxiety is, and we do our best to mitigate the circumstance. In other words, we study, we prepare. And then at some point, we that are Christians, we just have to trust the process. We just have to trust God. Even in the secular world, when I was in AA, one of the favorite phrases was just trust the process. And so often we find ourselves trying to control things. And one of the causes of anxiety is not being in control. And sometimes not being in control is just, it's okay. How about anger? Does anybody ever see anger as a mental health disorder? Just nod your heads up and down, because it can be. So what is the source of anger? Well, there's two primary sources of emotions. There's joy and fear. And so anger, very similar to anxiety, anger is another expression that comes out of fear. So when I'm dealing with anger, when I'm feeling anger inside myself, and it's an okay emotion, it's a defensive emotion. It's designed to prepare us to defend ourselves from something, but sometimes it gets out of hand. And so when I find myself experiencing anger and I'm in my best self, if I really want to deal with the issue, I ask myself, what am I afraid of? When Charo, my wife Charo, and I bought the house 12 years ago in Converse, there was a zero lot line, so it means that our property line was the neighbor's garage. That was part of our property line. And right up against his garage was this plant called a bougainvillea. Does anybody know what a bougainvillea is? They're all over the place here. They're beautiful. They have these beautiful purple flowers. They bloom for quite a while. They're bushes that can grow quite large, become hedges, and they have really nasty thorns on them about that big. And so in our property, it was right about the place where the property slanted away from my house towards the neighbor's garage. And so when I would mow the grass, I would I would brush up against this plant and you know, it would scratch me. I'd start to bleed. My wife would come out on the porch and she'd get tears in her eyes. She'd go, pobrecito, which is Spanish for poor dear. And so I thought I was going to take care of that. I was going to trim back this plant because it's pretty, but I didn't like it slashing out and cutting me. And it wasn't but a couple weeks and it was larger than before. So then I thought, I'm going to kill this plant. I'm going to cut it off at the ground, give it no source of light. That'll be it. Within about a month, it was taller than the neighbor's garage. What did I have to do to get rid of that bougainvillea plant?
You had to kill it at the root.
Get to the roots. And so in the same fashion, for instance, when I'm dealing with anger in my life, instead of dealing with the branches, the symptoms of anger, stop being that way, I ask myself, what's the root of this? Why am I afraid? Because if I deal with the root of the problem, then I take care of the problem itself. If I deal with the source of it, then it doesn't tend to come back and haunt me in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and I deal with the actual issue. Does that make sense? Now, I'm sure that none of you have ever wrestled with anger, but at your young ages, there's plenty of time left. You're going to probably at some point be angry at something, and you might employ that, asking yourself, what about this makes me afraid? And a lot of times people go, oh, I'm not afraid of anything. And then I'll go, yeah, but if you were, what might it be? You know, a lot of times people don't want to guess wrong, for instance. So when they're in my, you know, coming for counseling and I ask them a question and they don't have the answer, it's a lot of times it's because they don't feel the freedom to be wrong. And I say, well, so if you had to guess and you won $1 million, if you guessed, what would you guess? And they generally come up with a guess, and the guess is always right because, you know, we're our own authority on ourselves. Any other thoughts about things that people deal with that might impact students, fellow Christians? Any questions?
Well, I guess just one question I have is like just in general when it comes to these mental disorders or just mental states even. I understand Christianity can't always be, or religion can't always be like what we can put on someone to fix the issue. But do you think there is anywhere that religion can still be useful in these situations? Anywhere that we as Christians can employ what we have to help these people, if it's not something as serious maybe, or just any situation you can think of?
Well, by this shall all men know that you're my disciples, that you have love one for another. Okay, and that's Jesus commanding the disciples to love each other, not even love the world. And so when we see a brother or sister that's having a hard time, instead of just saying, I'll pray for you, what gives substance to that prayer? You know, gee, you're hungry. I'll pray that you find food. No, here, let me help you. So putting hands and feet to our assistance of our brothers and sisters, or even people who aren't Christians, but at the first level, Christians. What's the number one thing people need from us? They told me in graduate school that if we did our job of being friends, there'd be no business for counseling. And I think that they're right. I think that professor was right. So often we're so wrapped up in our own stuff that we don't take the time to actually be available for some of our friends, some people that we see that are hurting. The pop psychology statement is that we're so busy doing things now that we don't take time to just be in the presence of somebody. So we become human doings instead of human beings. So as Christians, the first thing we can do is show love, and show love by action. People don't care how much we know until they know how much we care. When I was going through a divorce from my first wife, and that's a very difficult thing, especially for a pastor, I have a group of friends that I call my pallbearers. And my best friend in Seattle said, if you can get out of life, if you end life with 8 enough people to carry your casket, 8 people to carry your casket, you've lived a good life. And I'm big, so I need 10. So I got 5 in Seattle, 5 in San Antonio. And 2 of the people in San Antonio, when they found out what I was going through, called me up and said, do you need me to come down, take time off from work and come down and spend some time with you? And I was amazed. I said, no, but there was just the offer was such a loving act. And so as Christians, obviously prayer, obviously presence, a ministry of presence, being available for somebody. People a lot of times just want to talk. That's why people pay me $60 an hour. And I'm a bargain. That's why they come to me, because I'm half price. But because people want to talk and there's nobody to talk to. I was at lunch in Dallas with the American Quarter Horse Association. And one of their employees at the time was a wonderful guy. His name was Michael, and their office is in Amarillo. And if you've ever been to Amarillo, it's a wonderful cowboy town, and it's a great place for married families with kids. But it's not got much of a single person nightlife. And he was from LA, and so he'd come from LA super nightlife to Amarillo. And Michael we were having lunch, and he was telling me about how difficult life was, and I started coming up with solutions. Started offering him help. And you know what he told me? He says, I don't need you to fix my problem. I just want you to listen. What a great lesson I learned. Sometimes if you come to me in counseling, you'll see that I'll cover my mouth. It makes me look very thoughtful, doesn't it? Makes me look very, very deep and wise. Why do you suppose I'm doing that?
To stop yourself from talking?
Right, to remind myself, shut up. Let the other person talk. Another thing that you might use if you're suspecting that there's an issue and you want to be helpful is the use of tension. Have you ever been in a room and nobody's speaking and all of a sudden you start feeling a tension inside of you? Has anybody ever felt that? Well, that's normal. We're, especially extroverts, but most people abhor a vacuum. They abhor the silence. And so when myself as a counselor, when I'm having a conversation and I'm feeling silence and I'm feeling the anxiety because of the silence, and I know it's there, well, the other person probably doesn't recognize exactly what they're experiencing, but they just know that it's uncomfortable. And the more I allow the silence to work as my friend, the more it pushes their desire to talk. And all of a sudden, they'll just kind of, I call it verbal vomit. They'll just kind of go, this is what's going on in my life. And so it's kind of like, I guess there's a sales technique or sales phrase that says, when you're doing sales negotiations, the first person to talk loses. Well, I kind of remind myself of that. And I just let the silence work and I just be. You remember Job when he was going through his trials? How wonderful that his friends came to sit with him. And how terrible it was that they opened their mouth and gave opinions. He would have been much better off, and they would have been better off if they just sat there with him. Just sat there. A ministry of presence. Then another question that you might ask if you're trying to help somebody is, what do you need from me? Because I can have all sorts of opinions and here, let me take this for you. Let me get this for you. My wife is good at that. I love my wife and she wants to do well. And so something will happen and she'll instantly try to solve it. And I go, stop. I don't need that from you. Here's what I want from you. This is what I need. And so sometimes we get so busy in the fix it mode in our mind that we don't take time to just stop, to be with the person and go, what can I do to help you? What do you need from me? And a lot of times they'll have an opinion and go, oh, I can do that. And sometimes if it's just leave me alone, well, maybe that's appropriate. And maybe you need to ignore that, but it gets you on a better track to have a conversation with them instead of telling them what they need, to ask them. Does everybody know what the Socratic method is? Does anybody know what the Socratic method is?
I don't.
Has anybody heard of the Socratic method?
I'm sure I've heard it before. It sounds familiar. I just don't know what it is off the top of my head.
Okay, so this is kind of a counseling world kind of philosophy, but the secret to better counseling is better questions. If Josiah comes to me for counseling and I give him a list of all the things, well, what you need to do is this, and what you need to do is this, and what you need to do is that, who owns those decisions? Josiah or me?
I do.
Probably.
No, you don't. I do. I told you what to do. They're my decisions. You didn't come up with a thing. So what is your chances of actually doing what I tell you to do after you leave? Flip a coin. If I ask you questions, so Josiah, what do you think about that? And you come up with I think I need to be doing this. I think I need to start wearing a purple hat to school because I think it would just help me in my class. Well, what are your chances of wearing that purple hat tomorrow when you made the decision? More or less than when I told you to do something?
Probably a lot more.
Right. And that's the Socratic method. I ask you questions, guided questions, but I ask you questions, putting you in a position where you come up with the answer, and it's your answer, and you own it. And so your chances of actually fulfilling it are far greater than if I give you a list of these are all the things you need to do. My medical doctor, I love the guy because he doesn't take control of my health. We're friends now. We've gone to lunch, but I fell in love with him because he doesn't feel. I've had doctors to go, I'm in charge of your health now, and you need to do what I say. Well, there's still a little rebel in me. It's like, no. I'd much rather have my own doctor. He works with me. He cooperates with me. It's my decision. He doesn't go home at night and worry about whether whatever I've chosen to do. He gives me that authority, and in return, I've had much better results with my weight and my blood pressure medicine, and because he empowers me to make the decisions, and he talks with me instead of instructs me. And a lot of Christians want to instruct. What you need to do is this. So when you're wanting to help people, letting them be them, listening instead of talking, asking questions instead of instructing, and kind of asking yourself, what would I want? How would I want somebody to treat me if I was hurting? And I just wanted to feel loved. One of the things that helps me is being in touch with me. Does everybody know what a Rolodex is?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't use them very often because we have data files in our computers, but I'm 150 years old, so I started off with Rolodexes on my desk. And what I say, the way I describe it is I have a Rolodex of my own emotions in my head. And when I'm looking at Josiah White, and I see him acting in certain fashions, and I go to my Rolodex and go, if I was behaving that way, I would probably, especially with what Josiah White is telling me, I would probably be feeling this. And that's a way of trying to have empathy with the person that I'm talking to. And then I would go, Josiah, with what you're telling me and what I'm seeing, it kind of, if I was going through this, I would probably be feeling a little overwhelmed. Is that what you're feeling? Because sometimes people can't put a word to it. But the more I'm aware of my own emotions, my own reactions, my own stuff, the better my chances are of being able to identify and connect with another person. And letting them be them. They're ultimately responsible, personal responsibility. Does that give you some things that you might include, might deal with? Or did I answer, or is there more to the question?
No, I think you
Okay.
got it all together.
What's that? Yes?
I was just thinking you got it all together. I think that really sums it up.
And so getting to know who you are helps you know others, and letting them be them and loving them, just being. We don't have to charge. In fact, I did a sermon for the racetrack chaplains 2 years ago. We had a meeting in the Billy Graham Chapel there in North Carolina. And I'd gone to Six Flags, and I purchased a couple of those superhero capes that you can buy at Six Flags. And I pulled them out and I go, we need to hang these up. We're not superheroes, all people need is they need us to love them. Just love them. I also bought from off of eBay, the little orange mask that, when you're flying an airplane and they say in case of change in cabin pressure, the orange mask comes down. Everybody flown in an airplane, everybody familiar with that. So they go, if you're sitting with children and invalids, what are you supposed to do with the mask? What are you supposed to do? Josiah, what are you supposed to do?
Give it to them.
No, you're supposed to put yours on first.
Oh.
Help yourself before you help them.
Right. You can't help anybody else breathe if you're not breathing yourself. And so it's important to realize that self-care is not selfishness. Self-care, true self-care, is managing your resources so that you are available to help those that are in need. So sometimes telling people no is the healthiest thing you can do. Because if you deplete yourself and you have nothing left to give, then you're not good to yourself or to anyone else. So what are you thinking, Josiah?
Well, this has been a great session. Thank you so much, Chaplain Mike. For a future, he is a counselor. Did you want to tell people how they can schedule an appointment with you?
Oh, well, sure. I do. I'm a chaplain, and that means I'm a pastor in a non-churched setting. I happen to be the chaplain at the horse racetrack here in San Antonio, Selma, Retama Park. But I am a licensed practicing counselor because I got tired of being a pastor with an opinion. So I went to Texas State and I got my master's degree there. And I do counseling at they call it 316 Church now on Prue Road. It used to be Fortress. I do that on Mondays, and then on more my side of town by the racetrack at Calvary Temple, I do counseling there at on Tuesdays and Thursday afternoons. And so you could call either one of those churches or call Josiah if you ever wanted to visit. And I do sliding scale, and first visit's always free, and nobody gets turned away for inability to pay, and everybody pays something. And because I don't want it to be a barrier, I just really want to help people. And so with that, I think it's time for me to walk into Jason's Deli and go to my accountability lunch.
Well, all right. Well, Chaplain Mike, did you want to pray for us?
I would be honored to pray for you. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for this group of young men. I pray that more than anything, that you keep yourself connected with them and through them. And when people see them, whatever they're doing, whether it's cybersecurity, Bible study, or playing volleyball, the people see your son, Jesus. Let them be attractive so that when people who are hurting, they instinctively have a sense that there's something different about this person, and I can go to them, and let them be that light of your son, Jesus. I pray when people see them, they see your fingerprint on their lives, the eyes of your son Jesus in their eyes. In the blood of that son Jesus we pray. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Chaplain Mike, for stopping by. We really appreciate it. Hope you have an awesome week, and go enjoy your lunch.
I will. God bless you guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You have a good one.
Thank you. You too. Bless you both. Bless all three of you. Bye-bye.
All right, I thought that was great. And so Josh, thank you for coming on. I know that Trent said that he had class. I don't know if you skipped it or not.
No, what's it called? It's actually I'm studying for a certification right now, and I just told him like to go. We're gonna do it later on.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks so much for dropping by. And just a reminder, we are going to the Pearl this Friday at 7 o'clock. And so if you're definitely interested or like if you have to call off work, we would definitely love to have you, meet you in person. That would be awesome.
Hey, Josh, did I ever get you onto the group meet? 'Cause I thought I had you a while back, but I don't see you in there. Do I need to do that again sometime?
Oh yeah, I'm not on there.
Weird. I must have messed that up. This whole time I just assumed you were in it. So I'll go and see if I can fix that here pretty soon.
Okay, thanks.
Do you have the group me app already, or do you need help
Definitely,
getting
I
it?
use GroupMe all the time.
Okay, then I guess I messed up along there, so I'll try and fix it here in a little bit.
Okay.
Have you guys seen the Snyder Cut?
I haven't, but I've been wanting to. I just haven't really got HBO. So, but I really want to watch it. It looks pretty good.
It's so good. I would even compare it to Infinity War. It's that
Really?
good. Yeah.
Because I was pretty bummed by the way the first Avengers movie turned out. So seeing just the snippets, I'm pretty pumped about it. I really want to watch it.
I wonder who would win, Darkseid or Thanos.
I think Thanos. I don't think Darkseid holds a candle, if I'm being honest. But all right. Well, I guess I got some other stuff to do. So I guess I will catch y'all later. I got an email to respond to. So wish me luck on that for the job. So
Nice,
Well-
congratulations, man. That's
I'm
awesome.
hoping I got it. It's second wave interview, so that's really good. I'm getting the next wave of interviews. So I'm really pumped about it.
That's good, man.
Well, I hope to see you guys Friday, and I'll see you tomorrow, Trent.
Yep. See y'all then.
All right. Bye.
All right, bye guys.